Our next speaker is Jose Vega. Jose is a legend, known for his disruptions of AOC, Kamala Harris, and other figures holding their feet to the fire, speaking up in support of Julian Assange, opposing war and demanding protection of our civil liberties. Jose has been working with the Schiller Institute here in New York City for many years, and he currently hosts a YouTube channel called Declaring Independence. Let's welcome to the stage Jose Vega.
Sorry, there's like a weird poem or something on here. Maybe it's not weird. Maybe it's a good thing. I don't know. Sorry. Let me start now. Okay. First, I just want to thank Caleb for inviting me to come here and speak to this. So thank you, Caleb. I'm here to express that I support you. And I will stand with anybody when it comes to stopping thermonuclear war. I just kind of want to come here and spread a message, you know, given that now we're in the danger of thermonuclear war and that Biden has resorted to sending cluster bombs, which will condemn children and innocent people in Ukraine to decades of accidental death. And this is why I believe in the principle of intervention. I'm sure many of you have seen some of the interventions done by myself and Kynan, who's also here in the room, and Nick, of course, and and Jonathan, Lucy, who's done it in Spanish. Actually, that was a revolutionary moment in world history there. I want to let also people know that I'm working with Diane Sayre. She's an independent candidate running for U.S. Senate here in New York. She's running against Kirsten Gillibrand. She ran against Chucky Schumer, or Chucky the Shoe, as Jimmy Dore likes to say. And I believe at this point that humanity has to stand up for peace. And at this point, regardless of political ideology, religion, or any other differences, we all have to come together to stand up for peace. And I also want to report that the Schiller Institute had an international conference in Strasbourg, France, right? Yeah, France. We had like Russian diplomats, Chinese diplomats, French diplomats, like diplomats from all over the world coming together. And they actually expressed a joint letter of support for an event that we're holding at the UN on August 6th. That is the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And so we're holding a rally at the UN on August 6th. And so these diplomats expressed a lot of support for that. And I think they put out like a joint resolution or something like that expressing that. And, you know, it's kind of sad that the United States has admitted that they can't even produce ammunitions anymore, despite the fact that we spend almost $1 trillion in Defense Department spending. So I just wanted to first bring that message to you guys because I'm involved in a lot of stuff. Normally, I talk about foreign policy and I try to save the world from blowing itself up, and I'm still doing that. And there is a reason to actually talk about local policy. I think I really appreciated your presentation because what it brings to my mind is a time in New York City called planned shrinkage. I don't know if people ever heard about this policy before, but the idea, yeah, there we go, one guy in the room got it, he's old enough to remember. That was 1970. This was done by the city planner of New York. His name was Roger Starr at the time. Roger Starr, not to be confused with Ringo Starr of the Beatles. Roger Starr's idea was that, look, there's too many people in New York. We're developing New York City too quickly. There's a lot of fires happening. Why don't we just let the city burn down? This was actually the policy. So what they did was they cut 2/3 of fire department stations. So 2/3 of firehouses were just taken away. 2/3 of the teacher force gone. 2/3 of the police force gone. 2/3 of public service workers gone. And where were these places being taken away most from? All the poor areas that you see today in New York City. The South Bronx is the way it is because of planned shrinkage. Queens, parts of Queens is the way it is because of planned shrinkage. Harlem is the way it is because of planned shrinkage. And don't get me started on places like Brownsville, Brooklyn. So the idea was that there were so many fires happening let them burn themselves down. So by shutting down the fire departments and fire stations, fire trucks couldn't get to the places of fires quick enough. So these buildings started burning themselves down. This is something that Kynan and I did a lot of research in, working with some public housing professors a long time ago, a year ago now, I think. And so you've had this policy of planned shrinkage. And Roger Starr wrote about this in the New York Times. Everybody hated him. And this was in conjunction with the Rand Corporation. People may know about the Rand Corporation because of Vietnam. They also been recently in the headlines because they're saying, they came out publicly saying, hey, maybe the U.S. should kind of pull back from Ukraine at this point. Mind you, this was the same Rand Corporation that was telling the media, no, the United States, every bomb we drop, we're killing like 100 or something Vietnamese. So it's okay. So we should, keep staying in Vietnam. The Rand Corporation also likes to dabble in public policy for city planning. They were telling the mayor at the time that, we completely endorsed planned shrinkage, and this was also the time of Big Mac. This is something a lot of the housing advocates may know about. The municipal, I forget the acronym, but Big Mac, right? So this was when... Municipal Assistance Corporation. Thank you. This is why I have Kynan with me, because he actually knows the stuff better than I do. So what you've had is a corporatization of New York City. And the thing is, the Rand Corporation didn't stop existing in the 70s. Actually, they kept running the town pretty much until the end of Bloomberg, which I think was 2012. So you think about that, right? Rand Corporation kept running New York City until 2012. And I think some of their people are still on some of the city planning committee, right? Planned shrinkage was just an expression of what Nixon termed benign neglect. Benign neglect was, well, just ignore the problem. Like, let's just not deal with it. That's what it was. Just let people die and let people kill themselves. What do we need to do? Why do we need to invert resources into a community that's already killing itself? That was the idea. That was the whole point. Wow, that's pretty cool. Sorry. I get distracted easily sometimes. But so I come up in this. I'm born in the Bronx. I've lived in the Bronx pretty much my whole life. I did live in Jersey for just a little bit. I don't like to tell people that because then I'm not a true New Yorker, I guess. But my formative years were in the Bronx. I was born in the Bronx. And when I was about 19 years old, I lived in an area of the Bronx called Morris Heights. Morris Heights is named after Gouverneur Morris. He's one of our founding fathers, the man who actually penned the Constitution. And there's also an area of the Bronx called Morrisania or Morrisania, too. That's where I live now, or I live just on top of it in an area called Foxhurst. But when I lived in Morris Heights, which is where Bronx Community College is, I lived in a basement apartment, which are technically illegal, by the way, yet the city still lets people live in there. And, over some months, I looked at my ceiling and I saw there was a little bubble there. And over time, it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And my mom and I didn't really know what to make of it. And then all of a sudden, it all just came crashing down. And you know what it was? It was sewage water. It was sewage water from the upstairs apartments. So it was like a 10-story building or so. All the sewage water was just seeping down into our basement apartment ceiling. And it wouldn't stop dripping for like 4 or 5 days or so because it just kept going. In a perfect world, the super or the landlord would have said, okay, let's get you out of there. Let's get you somewhere else or while we fix it. No. What happened was the super walked into the apartment, looked at all the sewage water on the floor, saw that my mom and I, who had not slept at that point for like 18 hours, trying to keep the water from coming into our rooms and buckets that we just had to keep pouring out, comes in, you can hear the tap tap of the sewage water, looks up at the ceiling, yeah, that's a problem. All right, walks out, doesn't come back. So there we are, just no idea what the hell's going on. He just looked at it and walked away. He's like, yeah, I guess that's really bad, I guess. It's like, yeah, it is bad. What are you gonna do about it? What do you want me to do about it? I'm just a super. I was like, So he said, yeah, no, this you have to call management. So what you learn about housing in New York City is that if it's not public housing, what some of these corporations do, or what these greedy landlords do, is they set up shell corporations. It was very difficult for me to figure out who the hell even owned my building, because the name of the people who lease the building is the address of the place. So think about it, right? So I lived in a building called 16 East 177th Street. That was my address. The name of the corporation that owns the building is 16 East 177th Street. You can imagine how difficult it is trying to Google that. And then you have to learn to put LLC afterwards. And then you can kind of figure it out. So what did I do? I decided, okay, I went to my congressman, Jose Serrano at the time. He was already out the door. He was already going to retire. He didn't care. Went to my assembly lady. Her name was something Jackson, I think Chantel Jackson. She says, her office says, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, we'll get you a lawyer, no problem. Did you call HPD, Housing and Preservation Development? I said, I sure did. And then they said, oh, well, what did they say? Well, I called HPD, I told them what happened. The lady on the phone said, that's terrible. We'll get someone out in 2 weeks. It's like, okay, no problem. 2 weeks, sure, no. I'm just gonna keep fending off, sewage water for 2 weeks. And nothing's going to happen. I might be homeless by then, or dead, or whatever. Finally, I went to my councilman, Fernando Cabrera. And I was in his district, and Fernando Cabrera's chief of staff, to his credit, was pretty helpful. He was able to accelerate housing and preservation development to come in literally a few hours after. So this is kind of the importance of why you should always go to somebody, because rather than 2 weeks, they came immediately after, because I guess get on the horn with somebody. HPD looks at the place, and then the nice lady, I remember her name, Inspector B, I think it was Honeybee or something, or Honey something. I remember because it was a sweet name. It had honey in it. Honeycutt, that's what it was, Inspector Honeycutt. So, she's to her credit, I mean, she was a little freaked out because there I was recording everything, and I had a camera on her, and and she's, looking at the place. So she's like taking notes, and then occasionally she'd glance at me like, can I finish? Oh, yeah, sorry, go ahead. And she's taking notes everywhere, and then she did her report, and then she sat in her car, and I remember her sitting in her car, and I'm there just looking, and she is sweating in her face or something, and then she comes out of the car and tells me, according to my supervisor, this isn't enough to declare it a disaster or an emergency to get you into temporary housing. So, point was, they said, they basically looked at the place and said it's livable. You're allowed to live there. It was not. And for anybody who wants proof, there's a news segment that I got. I called Bronx 12, or News 12 for us New Yorkers. I called News 12. They did a segment on it. You can see how terrible the apartment was. It was horrible. And also, I remember in that interview, they asked me, because what happened was the landlord got on the phone with my mom. We had just renewed the lease. And the landlord said, if you leave within the next 48 hours, we can rip up the new lease. Where the hell were we going to go? It's like, we're already a pretty poor family. We're on snaps, we're on food stamps. My grandfather gets like SSI, we get cash assistance. We got the whole 9 yards of government assistance. And so we said no. And the media asked me that too. Like, why did you take that? And I said, well, because we're human beings. That's why. We're human beings. We are not animals, and we have dignity. I'm not going to be subjected to being treated like an animal just because of some greedy landlord who doesn't want to fix the place up. Anyway, so I'm going to my councilman's office every day, and the chief of staff is helping me out, and he says to me, well, did you think about maybe, going somewhere temporarily, let the landlord fix it, and then you sublease the apartment? And I said to him, what are you, crazy? Why am I going to sublease the bar? Why would I just make this problem someone else's problem? He says, you could even make a tiny profit. You can only charge 1% more than what the rent is. So you can make a tiny profit. Like, what, another $50? And one day, I found this out. My name wasn't on the lease. It's my mother's name. It was on the lease. It turns out the chief of staff was calling my mother every day saying, your son is making too big of a deal of this, and he needs to stop. Why? Because I got a lawyer pro bono. That's why. I got the media to come. And I was telling the councilman and the chief of staff, I have recordings of this. I told them, look, as much as this is my problem, I'm sure I'm not the only one going through this. How many people in your neighborhood only speak Spanish and are immigrants and are afraid to speak up because they might be deported or they're more afraid of the consequences? This is a systemic problem. What are we going to do? And his response to me was, well, you're the one in front of me right now. So can't really do much about it. So anyway, he was calling my mom every night, in the night. He was always at night. Your son's making a big deal about this. And what freaked her out the most was when he said, if your son sues the landlord, you will never be able to rent an apartment in New York City again because your name is going to be on a list. And no landlord wants to deal with anyone who sues them. So, what happened? After that phone call was made, my mom and I, we moved in with our sister, with my sister, her daughter, of course, that's how that works. And I was still going to the apartment every day because the lawyer said, take pictures every day, take videos just so you can see. And the last thing we found out was that there was actually black mold that was developing. And because the city had declared the apartment to be livable, that meant that we could also hold the city accountable, not just the landlord, for having us live in black mold. So the lawyer said, look, I could get something big off the back end, and we could be looking 6-7 figure settlement. The next day, the locks are changed, both in the front door. So the way New York City apartments work, for those of you who've flown in, there's the building door, and then there's your apartment door. Right? So first you got to get in the building, then you got to get in the apartment. He changed the building door. I was still able to get in because you can finesse your way through. Then he also changed the apartment door. Locks, that's what I'm trying to say. I called the lawyer. The lawyer says, call the police. Police come. I also have a recording of this. This was the day that it was like the worst day. So the police come, and I'm explaining to the police the situation. But then the super is saying something else completely. He's like, no, this guy's been squatting here. We've been trying to get him out, and it's been only 2 weeks. So, if in New York City, there's a law that like if you squat in a place for a month, they legally can't kick you out, even if they change the locks. And so I said my side of the story. And so the cop said, okay, well, if your side of the story is true, get your mom to come here to show us the lease, and we'll have the super change the locks back. I call my mom on the phone while the police are listening. And my mom says, no, we're not going to fight this. So then she starts telling the police that her son is crazy and that she doesn't want any problems, and we're just going to let her go. So there I am, humiliated because the cops are looking at me like I'm crazy. And then the super and the super's wife are telling the cops that my mom and I are always been bad news anyway, and that we always like to cause problems. So I'm just sitting on a curb and I'm just crying because I didn't know what the hell else to do. And the lawyer's like, that's bad because we needed access to the apartment, and your mom's name's on the lease, not your name. So the lawyer couldn't do much either. So anyway, that was 2018 that happened. And the reason, though, that I'm not solely focused on housing, I am, but that I have such a bigger outlook on it, is that I got the opportunity to fly out to South Dakota a few months after that to work on a political congressional campaign, and I learned that the farmers out there were actually suffering a whole lot worse than I was. And I started getting a different perspective that it's not a New York City problem, it's not a New York problem, it's not even a United States problem, a problem of intention in the world right now, that they are trying to kill us all who's not supposed to be alive. And so that's why I want there to be a planet where we can fight for housing, and a nuclear war will ensure nobody has housing. That's number one. But despite that, and despite the clear injustices that are happening here in New York City, I'm very happy to be working with Diane Sayre, because Diane Sayre, who's running for Senate here in New York, tackles these issues because they're one and the same. What's happening domestically happens internationally. Our international policy, our foreign policy, is a very clear reflection of our domestic policy. If you want to fix housing, if you want to fix homelessness, poverty, hunger, all the problems in the country, you have to first start by addressing the fact that we're spending over $1 trillion, okay, in our Defense Department. And as Jimmy Dore likes to say, we've sent $130 billion to Ukraine. We could have ended homelessness with that money 4 times. We could have ended homelessness once, and then for some reason change our minds and bring homelessness back, and then end it again, and then bring it back, and then end it again. And we could have done that 4 times with the money we've sent to Ukraine. So I guess I just want to end this off by saying kind of the way I started. I will work with anybody to ensure that we have a safe planet, and I will work with anyone to ensure that everyone has an equal right to housing. And I do believe in an economic bill of rights. And so, thank you.
Wow. That was very moving, Jose.